You are seeing the opening bell be rung. U.S. stock futures plummeted this morning as President Trump's sweeping tariffs announcements are sparking fears of a global trade war.
Breaking news at this hour, the stock market and the rocky fallout from President Trump's tariff negotiations continuing at this hour. The market down right now as we come on the air.
And we will not let that happen any longer.
"2025. The world didn't need another crisis. Climate volatility was ramping up, AI was stealing jobs, and the global economy was still nursing a post-pandemic hangover. So naturally, it was the perfect time for a full-blown trade war. It started with a tweet. It always does. New tariffs coming. Bad deals end now. America first. At Real Donald Trump." The words were short, loud, and vague. A signature of the man behind them. 4 years out of office had changed nothing about his approach to global trade. If anything, it hardened into something more absolute. Before his cabinet was even confirmed, before the inaugural ball decorations were taken down, the economic battle lines were drawn. Global leaders are condemning what some are calling an unprecedented economic assault. Within hours, global markets began convulsing. World leaders went into emergency sessions. Economists reached for their blood pressure meds. And just like that, the global economy was dragged into a war it didn't ask for. Tariffs. The economic version of throwing a chair in a bar fight. You don't quite know what you'll hit, but someone's definitely bleeding by the end. Donald Trump's return to power in 2025 wasn't just a political comeback. It was an economic declaration of war. Trump didn't wait for his coffee. Day one back in the office, he kicked off a tariff blitz that made his 2018 trade war look like a warm-up act. The White House called it a decisive stand for economic sovereignty. Wall Street called it something else. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt confirmed that President Trump has signed an executive order implementing immediate tariffs on all imported goods. The rates range from 10% to 60%, depending on country of origin and product category. 25% on European automobiles, 35% on Chinese electronics, 40% on Canadian lumber, 50% on Mexican produce. Overnight, the cost of everything from Canadian maple syrup to Mexican tequila, European cheese to Chinese electronics shot through the roof. The comprehensive tariff schedule left no stone unturned, no industry untouched, no shopping cart unaffected. No one has ever seen anything like this. Previous administrations used tariffs surgically, targeting specific industries or countries. This is more like economic carpet bombing. The official reason, job protection. The real reason, ego economics. Several in Trump's inner circle supported the rationale, since it centers on protecting American jobs and breaking what he calls unhealthy global dependencies. But the economic consensus is that broad tariffs rarely achieve these goals. To economists, it looked less like a strategy and more like a tantrum in a boardroom. To understand Trump's economic worldview, you need to understand that he sees international trade not as cooperation, but as competition. A zero-sum game where someone wins and someone loses. It's like a protectionist karaoke version of 1980s Reaganomics, but with more caps lock. The tariff rates are staggering. 25% on Canadian goods, 35% on European products, 45% on Mexican imports, and China? A whopping 60% across the board, raising some to 145%. Trump believes that globalization has been a raw deal for American workers, and there's some truth to that for certain communities. But his solution, economic nationalism, throws out decades of economic integration that has, on balance, created prosperity. For places like Youngstown, Ohio, or Flint, Michigan, towns hollowed out by deindustrialization, the promise of economic nationalism resonates. But can tariffs really turn back time? The administration argued it was high time the US stopped being taken advantage of. But the reality was, by lighting the global trade system on fire, America wasn't just torching bad deals, it was setting itself alight in the process. Trump claimed his tariffs would bring back a golden age for American workers by reviving lost industries. The idea is that higher prices on foreign goods will push people to buy American and boost local factories. But economists point out that the trade deficits he wants to fix actually show the US is strong, not weak. The US has moved past manufacturing, says Jayant Menon, a research fellow. Other countries dream of reaching this stage, but Trump wants to go backward. The economic doctrine of America First had entered its most aggressive phase yet, and the world was about to respond. If the White House expected the world to simply absorb American tariffs without response, they were in for a rude awakening. It took exactly 8 days for the world to respond. You punch the world economy in the face, expect it to punch back.
Tonight, I am announcing Canada will be responding to the US trade action.
Canada, ever the diplomatic neighbor, struck back first and politely declared economic war. Former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced a matching 25% tariff on US products like corn dogs, bourbon, and, the ultimate insult, Ford F-150s. That's right, they went after America's lunch and its favorite vehicle. China's response was swift and calculated. The Chinese Finance Ministry stated that the United States has violated World Trade Organization rules and norms of international trade, and that China will defend its economic sovereignty with countermeasures. We do not wish for a trade war, but we are not afraid of one. That was his statement. China clapped back with brutal efficiency, slapping 125% tariffs on US technology, lithium batteries, and agriculture. A direct hit to America's innovation economy and heartland farmers. They strategically targeted industries in states that supported Trump. Soybeans from the Midwest, aircraft from Washington, tech from California. And the dominoes continued to fall. As reports of Canadian and Chinese retaliations dominated headlines, other global powers were already drafting their own economic countermeasures. The pattern was becoming clear. No major trading partner would absorb these tariffs without response. Then came the European Union and Mexico, completing what trade analysts now call the retaliation square. 4 economic powerhouses locked in commercial combat. What made this retaliation cycle remarkable was how surgically targeted it became. The EU isn't just hitting random American products. They're specifically targeting goods produced in Republican voting states. It's economic pressure designed to create political pressure. Bourbon from Kentucky, cheese from Wisconsin, oranges from Florida, aircraft parts from South Carolina. The retaliators weren't just throwing punches, they were aiming for the electoral jugular. Within 3 weeks, over 85% of American exports faced retaliatory tariffs from trading partners. The trade war had gone global. The European Commission estimates that these countermeasures will affect $26 billion worth of US exports, adding pressure to American businesses that depend on European demand. What we're seeing is the dangerous spiral effect of retaliation in modern trade disputes. Country A hits Country B with tariffs. Country B retaliates. Country A responds with more tariffs, and so on. There's no built-in circuit breaker. The domino effect of retaliation meant that by March 2025, nearly 60% of global trade was subject to new tariffs or restrictions. The world's largest economies were now engaged in the commercial equivalent of mutually assured destruction. What started as an America First economic maneuver quickly morphed into a world versus America standoff. Tariff after tariff flew across borders like economic missiles. Allies turned into rivals. Rivals turned into cold calculators of revenge. And the rules-based trade system? It stood by like an old referee watching a bar fight in disbelief. But while political posturing continued, The economic impact was already sending shockwaves through financial markets that no one could ignore. The markets hate uncertainty, and a global trade war is uncertainty on steroids. When the first round of tariffs hit, markets plunged 12% almost instantly. When the retaliations came, we lost another 18%. That's officially bear market territory. No market was immune. London, Tokyo, Shanghai, Frankfurt, all feeling the heat of economic nationalism gone global. Supply chains froze. Exporters pulled back. Investors scrambled to find safe ground in a battlefield of unpredictable policy. The S&P 500 fell 22% in the first month of tariffs. The Nasdaq, heavy with companies dependent on global supply chains, dropped 31%. Analysts warn the scale and speed of capital flight from emerging markets could trigger a financial crisis worse than 2008. Economists couldn't agree on what would happen next. Some predicted a deep recession. Others hoped for a quick recovery. But nobody saw a win on the horizon. Not for America, not for its trading partners, and definitely not for everyday people trying to buy groceries. Companies once thought invincible suddenly became vulnerable. Apple relies on Chinese manufacturing. Boeing sells primarily to international airlines. Automakers need global supply chains. No one escapes a trade war unscathed. International markets fared no better. The Nikkei fell 18%. London's FTSE dropped 24%. Shanghai's composite index fell 28%. Stocks tanked, inflation soared, and no one could agree on where the bottom was. Merchandise trade between the US and China is projected to fall by 81%, signaling a significant decoupling of the two largest economies. When the smartest people in finance couldn't agree on what was happening, you knew you were in uncharted waters. But while Wall Street debated theories, Main Street was already feeling the pain. If tariffs are economic weapons, they're not smart bombs. They're closer to landmines, indiscriminate, and often hurting those least equipped to absorb the shock. In Iowa, soybean farmers who once exported tons of crops to China watched their fields rot. Overnight, their product became 125% more expensive there, and the Chinese just stopped buying. In Ontario, auto parts factories that supplied Detroit had to lay off workers as orders dried up. In Oaxaca, Mexico, tequila distilleries were stacked with products they couldn't export. Americans buy 70% of premium tequila. Now, with the 50% tariff, their sales have collapsed. Then came the consumer side. Lattes now cost $15. Almond milk became a flex. Peanut butter, once a humble spread, turned into a luxury item. Parents started rationing juice boxes. Some stores installed security tags on eggs, all thanks to geopolitics. What consumers don't realize is how many products contain globally sourced components. That smartphone? Parts from 43 countries. That car? Components from 14 nations. Tariffs ripple through supply chains, eventually reaching your wallet. Facing the threat of higher prices as a result of tariffs, some consumers hunker down and curb their spending. Others make bigger purchases now, earlier than planned, for fear of paying more next week or month. What globalization gave in abundance, affordability, convenience, access, the trade war took away in tariffs. Suddenly, the modern consumer was living in a world where everything was more expensive and nothing made sense. But for those watching from the sidelines, the damage was about to get much worse. And then there's the rest of the world. The countries not directly in the fight, but still very much feeling the blast. Trade wars between economic superpowers always create collateral damage far beyond their borders. Oil prices swung wildly as markets tried to price in the impact of tariffs on global energy demand. From Jakarta to Johannesburg, inflation spiked as import costs rose and currencies weakened against the dollar. Capital is fleeing to safe havens. Emerging markets are seeing massive outflows, which means less investment in critical infrastructure and development projects. In Bangladesh, The garment industry, which accounts for over 80% of the country's export earnings, faced catastrophic disruption as American retailers cancelled orders amid price hikes and consumer pullback. Hundreds of factories closed overnight. Within months, an estimated 2.8 million garment workers, predominantly women who were their families' primary breadwinners, found themselves without income. The government, already struggling with climate disasters, had no safety net to catch them. "We survived COVID shutdowns," said Fatima Rahman, a former line supervisor at a Dhaka factory. "But this trade war might kill us for good." For many fragile economies, the tariff war was the final shove. There's an African proverb that says, "When elephants fight, it's the grass that suffers." In the economic ecosystem, smaller economies are the grass, crushed underfoot as giants battle. Economists are projecting that this trade conflict could push an additional 120 million people back into extreme poverty globally. That's 2 decades of development progress potentially wiped out, all because economic superpowers couldn't resist playing a game of commercial chicken. And as the damage spread, one question loomed over a world in economic freefall. How would all this end? Six months into Tariffageddon, the question on everyone's mind: how does this end? Was there an exit strategy? A way to unwind the chaos and return to something resembling order? Not really. Global institutions like the WTO, which once mediated disputes, now looked powerless, reduced to issuing strongly worded statements no one read.
If we have tit-for-tat retaliation, whether it's 25%, tariff 60%, and we go to where we were in the 1930s, we're going to see double-digit global GDP losses. Double-digit. That's catastrophic. Everyone will pay. Everyone.
World leaders met in emergency summits, but without a consistent US strategy, no compromise stuck. Trump doubled down. China fortified. The EU waited him out. Everyone else held their breath. Economic experts believe there are 3 possible endgames here. 1. Countries gradually back down through negotiated settlements. 2. The economic pain forces a complete reversal. Or 3. This becomes the new normal, a more fragmented global economy. No one knew what victory looked like anymore, because there was no battlefield, no surrender, just a slow economic erosion, masked by nationalism and noise. Behind closed doors, negotiations continue. As the economic impact of this trade war with China becomes clear, Trump now wants to strike agreements with an array of other countries, halting those tariffs until July.
And what we have ended up with here, as I told everyone a week ago, they're in this very spot, do not retaliate and you will be rewarded. So every country in the world who wants to come and negotiate, we are willing to hear you. We're going to go down to a 10% baseline tariff for them, and China will be raised to 125 due to their insistence on escalation.
But deadlines only work if people believe they mean something, and many didn't. This administration, as Canada and Mexico know well, has a habit of scuffing its lines in the sand. The tariff escalations have led to significant disruptions. Companies are re-evaluating supply chains, with some shifting operations to Southeast Asian countries like Vietnam and Thailand. But with each side waiting for the other to blink first, resolution seems distant. In a world ruled by egos and economics, everyone pays the price, literally. What happens next? Trump, who built and rebuilt his political career on a promise to make America great again, has opted to make America wait again. And then, just as things looked like they couldn't spiral further, came the next tweet, @RealDonaldTrump. New tariffs coming next week. Big ones. You'll see. America first. Like, share, and subscribe to never miss out on our Discovery contents. We'll see you in the next one.